Not even her dog. It's my dog! She's taking my dog!
At the end of episode 3 of Masters of the Air, you may have been left wondering what happened to Lieutenant Curtis R. Biddick, portrayed by Barry Keoghan. As my favorite character in the series, I had hoped that the scene had been dramatized and Biddick had survived the crash in his flying fortress, nicknamed Escape Kit after it was badly crippled by flak. As we learned later in the series, though nobody told us, he had unfortunately been killed. So curious as I am, I set about finding out the actual circumstances surrounding his death. As a member of the 100th Bomb Group, which was the focus of the series, his planes were often torn to pieces, but Biddick and his crew always managed to make it back to base. Following one raid over Germany, the aircraft returned to Thorpe Abbotts with over 1,700 holes and 2 wounded. As depicted in episode 2 of Masters of the Air, on a return bombing mission in Norway, Biddick's B-17 suffered severe damage. With their oxygen system knocked out, Biddick and his co-pilot Richard Snyder passed an emergency bottle back and forth to stay conscious. With the plane drained of fuel, Biddick was forced to make an emergency landing in Aberdeen, Scotland, where they crashed into a farm owned by a Royal Air Force pilot, who assisted them with getting back to Thorpe Abbotts the following day. Lieutenant Biddick had proven himself time and again when faced with life-threatening situations. On August 17, 1943, the 100th Bomb Group set out on the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. The mission involved crossing hundreds of miles of enemy-occupied territory in order to destroy vital war production in Regensburg and Schweinfurt, facing murderous fire from first the ground and then enemy fighters. The escape kit was fatally hit between Frankfurt and Nuremberg. Numerous hits to the nose and the fuselage started a fire that quickly consumed the aircraft. Biddick immediately rang the alarm, alerting his crew to immediately bail out. Flight Officer Snyder, the co-pilot, attempted to bail out through the window. Reports from other pilots could not confirm whether his parachute opened, but he did not survive. Biddick remained in the pilot's seat, by this time likely trapped by the fire. In the series, Biddick attempts to land the plane in a cleared area of forest in order to save his badly wounded co-pilot who could not bail out. In terrible reality, Lieutenant Biddick was consumed by the flames, with his aircraft exploding in the air. The mission report stated, "It is believed by the surviving crew that in holding the plane steady, he was caught by the fire in the cockpit and went down with the ship." But this was not the end of the story. Navigator Lieutenant Harry Crosby, portrayed by Anthony Boyle, who also narrated Masters of the Air, was on a different aircraft during the bombing. In the series, Crosby asks one of the gunners if he knew where Biddick's plane had been shot down, as he hadn't the time to mark it in the log. The gunner replied that he didn't think a goddamn navigator in the entire wing had time to work the log. They estimated that Biddick was lost around 11 a.m., with Crosby marking the estimated position on his flight map. In reality, Biddick's plane went down at 10 a.m. Why, in the midst of combat, did navigators feel that it was so important to get the location right? As most flyers were buried where they crashed, the simple answer is so they could possibly be located by the Graves Registration Service at a later date and given proper burials. Biddick, Snyder, Radio Gunner Sergeant Robert R. Decay, and Aerial Engineer Sergeant Lawrence Godby were all found near the crash site by locals, who buried them in a church cemetery in the nearby town of Pulfringen. It was from these graves that the GRS exhumed the men in late 1945. They were identified by their dog tags and personal effects. The War Department updated their status from missing in action to killed in action. The families were then notified and asked whether they would like their loved ones to remain in the National Cemetery abroad or be returned to the United States for burial. Between 1947 and 1951, the young men of Escape Kit were repatriated. Snyder was returned to his native Missouri, where he was interred in Memorial Park Cemetery. Decay's remains came home to Clinton Grove Cemetery in Michigan, where he grew up. Biddick, Godby, and Sergeant James Baer, another pilot who was killed during the raid on Regensburg, were interred together at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery on the banks of the Mississippi River in St. Louis, Missouri. Unfortunately, their remains had been commingled as the GRS had been unable to separately identify them. The 3 men share a final resting place, unable to return to their families, but nonetheless honored like the heroes they are